Today I'm doing a report on Ayahuasca, which stands for Vine of the Soul. I'll be briefly covering psychedelics in general, but I want to put a main focus on ayahuasca. The reason why I chose ayahuasca is because I think it just has so much potential, and I also find it so interesting. We know that our body is run by a series of complex chemical reactions, with the brain being in charge. So approaching it scientifically, the more we learn about the human mind and the more that we deepen our understanding of how the brain works, leads to improvement in treatments and improvement of life in general. The psychedelic experience is so interesting to me, and ayahuasca has such an interesting background. Here we have our brain, our control center, the pilot of our electrical meat suit, going through millions of chemical reactions that determine our mood, our emotion, our actions. Our emotion and imagination make sense from a survival perspective, of course, but why are we able to have these vivid hallucinations? The reported effects only add to the intrigue. Personal development resulting from an altered level of consciousness, to beneficial effects on addiction, mood disorders, PTSD, migraines, now even possible cancer treatments, potential for brain cell protection and growth, as well as improved psychological well-being, with less side effects than current mental health medications. And it's illegal? How could anyone not be interested? The background of ayahuasca comes from a historical perspective, South America. Shamans and indigenous people have considered ayahuasca a healing medicine for hundreds of years, something of spiritual importance. In the report that I read and watched, the shaman in particular really emphasized how much he believed in this medicine and in its potential for helping other people. Unfortunately, research on psychedelics was banned in 1970 when it became associated with people using it for recreational use, certain people going against the grain. The illegal status made it hard to study. One study that I read had a disclaimer to not ask how to get illegal drugs from them. They must have had a pretty good attorney. Luckily, restrictions have slowly lifted in other parts of the world. There are gatherings here in the US, MAPS, which stands for Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, which share information and push for reconsideration of the current laws regarding psychedelics. Hopefully, our future will show a more open-minded view. And with that said, let's get down to chemistry. In a very simple viewing, our brain sends and receives signals through brain cells called neurons. Our body needs these signals to travel fast, and that is where neurotransmitters come in. Neurotransmitters make communication between the nerve cells easier by diffusing across the junction where the two neurons meet, transferring the signal, also called an impulse. Neurotransmitters travel down the first neuron and are released to go bind to the receptor sites on the second nerve cell. The main neurotransmitter we need to know for our discussion is serotonin. You may have heard it referred to as the happy chemical. Most current mental health medications alter the levels of either serotonin, dopamine, or norepinephrine. So then, how are we altering these chemicals in our brain? Well, a lot of things can alter them. Stress, trauma, exercise, even cuddling. But in the scope of what we're discussing here, usually the neurotransmitters are broken down, but when the binding receptors are blocked, reabsorption can't happen. This causes the neurotransmitter and its effects to last longer. To say it another way, blocking reabsorption increases the level of neurotransmitters available for use. To make ayahuasca, you need the leaves, stems, and roots of two plants, Banisteropis caapi and Psychotropia viridis. Inside of these plants are beta-carboline alkaloid derivatives, beta being a classification to show it's the second carbon from a group of known carbons, an alkaloid meaning an organic compound that has at least one nitrogen, and hallucinogenic tryptamine alkaloids, also known as dimethyltryptamine or DMT. Funnily enough, DMT is shaped similarly to our good friend neurotransmitter serotonin. The chemicals in psychedelics look structurally like the ones in our brain, which obviously means that we were meant to ingest them so that they could bond to our neuron receptors and alter our cognition. Full disclosure, I'm just kidding. It's not that kind of video. In ayahuasca, there are 3 alkaloids: harmine, harmaline, and tetrahydroharmine. Harmine and harmaline are monoamine oxidase reversible inhibitors, which means that they don't shut down an enzyme completely and make it unusable, but instead temporarily slow it down. And once they're gone, the enzyme that was inhibited can work again. While tetrahydroharmine inhibits serotonin uptake. So, a psychedelic behaves in the same way that the top mental health medications do. So what is happening to our brain then for there to be hallucination? Obviously, unfortunately, I could not conduct this experiment myself, but the study I viewed recorded brain imaging through an fMRI, and what it showed was more varied brain activity. Not more brain activity, but more varied. That means more imagination, more dynamic thoughts. I was trying not to get wrapped up in mystical terminology, but one thing that was repeatedly mentioned was ego death, a feeling of oneness. The way that it was described was the ability to perceive without being attached to identity. And in the scans, it actually showed the parts of the brain that had to do with identity and individuality disappeared and then came back stronger after the experience with ayahuasca had ended. This reported variation in brain activity could be why we're having these reported benefits to mental health. As far as applications and uses, I think here the sky is the limit. We have a drink that can behave in the same ways as highly demanded medications, with fewer side effects and a low physical danger point, with, as of the time of this report, there are no deaths due to ayahuasca in clinical trials, where it's carefully measured. I think there is a great opportunity here to study the brain more and potentially equip ourselves with new forms of therapy. We're talking physical and mental health opportunities by researching this. As I said, I believe knowledge of the mind leads to better treatment, leads to better lives. And that is why I think that this is such an interest to society. So here's a quiz for understanding. What is ayahuasca? Hopefully you say, a drink made from plants native to South America that's commonly used in spiritual healing. What is a neurotransmitter? A chemical substance that transfers impulses between neurons. What is an example of a neurotransmitter? Serotonin, or dopamine, or norepinephrine are the ones we mentioned here. How do neurotransmitters become inhibited? When neuron receptor sites are blocked. What acts as a neurotransmitter in ayahuasca? Dimethyltryptamine, or DMT. What kind of medications were mentioned that also work by inhibiting reabsorption? Popular mental health medications. Why is ayahuasca a potentially good replacement for those medications? Less side effects and low physical danger. Why study chemical reactions in the body? Human life depends on internal chemical reactions. Why have psychedelics been difficult to study? They were banned in 1970s. What do you think is the best way to find new treatments? For me, I think this is exactly the right way. Exploration of things that we already know. Research, trial and error. Thank you for sticking through this with me. I have my references listed here, and I'll also be sure to include them in the description. I definitely encourage you to check out the video by Vsauce, which was one of the main things that I referenced. It's so interesting and really cool to watch someone who's actually able to do the experiment themselves. I sincerely hope that this next generation of scientists keeps pushing the envelope and bringing it further, and we see where this research with ayahuasca takes us. Thanks again. Bye.